when neighbors hardly know each other's names anymore, and kindness seems as rare as hen's teeth. I reckon we need reminding that good folks still choose mercy over convenience. This here story comes down through 3 generations of frontier families, speaking to choices we all face, whether to see someone else's troubles as their own problem, or as our chance to do what's right. The barbed wire bit deep into Caleb's weathered palm as those distant figures topped the ridge. A woman's faded dress catching the evening breeze like a surrender flag. 3 small shadows trailing behind her weary steps. He'd been working his Colorado spread alone for nigh on 2 years. Strangers usually meant trouble. Bill collectors, claim jumpers, men with hard intentions and harder fists. But this little group moved all wrong for danger. Too slow. Too fragile. The woman stumbled, stayed down longer than she ought, rose again with visible effort that made Caleb's chest tighten. His hammer hung forgotten as cold recognition struck. He was watching somebody's last desperate gamble play out in real time. What drives a mother to stake everything on a stranger's mercy? Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Caleb's work boots crunched through dried prairie grass as he approached the gate. The hammer's weight pulled heavy at his shoulder, 20 paces away. The woman lifted her chin. Her lips moved silent, either practicing words or sending up prayers. The young ones pressed close to her worn skirts like scared rabbits seeking shelter. The oldest girl, maybe 8 years, cradled a bundle that squirmed and whimpered, "Baby." The boy's bare feet showed black with trail dust and something darker that looked like dried blood. "Mister," the woman's voice cracked dry as old leather. "I got to ask you something important." Caleb stopped at the gate's rusty hinges. They squealed as wind pushed the wooden slats open. Her eyes met his, gray as winter clouds, ringed with the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. "Ma'am," he touched his hat brim respectful, her hands twisted in faded calico fabric. "These here are my children, Mary, Thomas, and baby Samuel." Each name dropped careful as coins into an empty purse. "I'm Elena Moore," the baby's thin cry cut through evening air, weak as a newborn kitten's mule. "Coffee's still warm on the stove," Caleb heard himself say. Words tumbled out before his brain caught up. "If you folks are needing refreshment..." Elena's shoulders trembled once. That's mighty kind of you, sir." Inside his cabin, the coffee pot hissed gentle on the cast-iron stove. Elena perched on the edge of his lone good chair like a bird ready for flight. The children clustered by the door, 3 pairs of hollow eyes following his every move with the caution of creatures who'd learned not to trust easy. Caleb poured steaming coffee into his best tin cup. The rich smell filled the cabin with warmth and comfort. His hands shook slightly as he offered it across the pine table. Elena's fingers brushed his when she took the cup. Cold as January morning despite the day's heat, she sipped once, twice, set the cup down with careful precision that spoke of someone making precious things last. "I ain't got money to pay you." The words tumbled faster now, like water through a broken dam. "My husband passed on. Debts took everything we had. The children..." Her fingernails carved half-moons into her palms. "They ain't had proper food since Tuesday last." Tuesday. 4 days without eating. "Please, mister, take them," Elena's voice split like kindling. I can't bear watching them waste away. You seem decent folk. They're good children. Won't cause trouble. I swear before heaven they won't cause trouble. Baby Samuel's ribs showed sharp through his torn shirt like fence slats. Thomas stepped forward on bleeding feet, left a dark print on clean pine boards. Ma, we gonna live here now, with this nice man. Elena's face crumpled. But before she could answer, before Caleb could find words for what he was witnessing, heavy footsteps echoed across the front porch, deliberate, measured, not the desperate shuffle of more hungry travelers. Someone else had followed this family across 20 miles of empty country. Caleb's hand found the hammer handle as the footsteps stopped outside. The cabin door creaked open without so much as a knock. Evening, Caleb. Doc Morrison's familiar voice carried the weariness of a man who'd ridden hard miles. His black leather bag clinked against the doorframe as he stepped inside. Spotted smoke from your chimney on the ridge. Figured you might have company. Elena's body went rigid as stone. Her arms tightened around baby Samuel until the child whimpered soft protest. Doc. Caleb's grip loosened on the tool. Mrs. Moore here and her young ones needed shelter for the evening. Doc Morrison's experienced eyes swept the cabin, took in the hollow cheeks, the patched clothing, Thomas's bloody footprints on clean pine. His weathered face gentled like he was approaching spooked horses. I see. He set his medical bag down, careful on the table. Let me have a look at those feet, son. The next hour passed in blessed quiet, while Doc Morrison tended Thomas's cuts with carbolic acid and clean cotton strips. Elena sat still as carved wood, watching every movement. No one spoke of payment. No one mentioned what came next when morning arrived. When Doc Morrison finally packed his instruments and rode back toward town, the cabin fell silent, except for the coal oil lamp's steady whisper. The sharp smell of medicine hung in the air like a promise of healing. We'll bed down in the barn, Elena said to her folded hands. Children can sleep warm by the stove if that suits you. Caleb stared up at rough-hewn ceiling beams his father had shaped 20 years back. Shadows danced across wood grain that held memories like pressed flowers. His mother's voice echoed from those rafters. Her final words before consumption took her. Don't you ever let folks go hungry if you got the means to help, son. He'd been 12 then. Same age Mary was now. Trying to hold a family together with nothing but stubborn hope. The straw-tick mattress crackled beneath him as he shifted weight. Corn husks poked through worn ticking. But the familiar discomfort couldn't distract from the sounds across the cabin. Elena's breathing came quick and shallow, the rhythm of someone who couldn't afford deep sleep in unfamiliar places. Dawn crept through oiled paper windows like spilled honey. Elena was already moving about, folding the children's meager belongings into neat bundles. Her movements held the efficiency of someone who'd practiced leaving at a moment's notice. Mary clutched a corn husk doll whose faded dress matched her own patched pinafore. The toy's button eyes stared with the same hollow look as the children who owned nothing but each other. Much obliged for the night's shelter, Elena said without meeting his gaze. We'll be stepping along now before we overstay our welcome. Caleb's bare feet hit cold pine planks. Where are you folks headed? Elena's hand stilled on Thomas's spare shirt, the only one without holes worn clean through. Denver, I reckon. Heard tell they got work there for women willing to take in washing. Thomas rubbed sleep from his eyes with small fists. Ma, we gonna walk some more today. My feet still hurt some. Hush now, child. Elena's voice carried forced brightness that fooled no one. Help your sister gather Samuel's things. Caleb watched Elena pack away hope with each folded garment. Her shoulders curved inward like she was protecting something fragile in her chest that might break if jostled wrong. The cornbread from last evening sat hard as river rock on his table. He'd planned to make it stretch 3 days, nibbling careful portions. Now he looked at it different, saw it divided 5 ways instead of hoarded for one. "Belongings are already packed," Caleb said to Elena's bent head. The words carried weight like stones dropped in deep water. "Leave them be." Elena's hands froze mid-fold. She looked up slow, like someone afraid of hoping wrong. "You stay too." The simple words hung in morning air between them. Elena's face went white as fresh flour, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "Mister, we can't possibly impose on your hospitality any further. Ain't imposing." Caleb moved to the stove, his back to her shock. "Could use help around this place anyway. Haven't had a proper cooked meal since when memory failed him." "You know your way around a kitchen. I can cook." Elena's whisper barely carried across the small room. Thomas bounced on bandaged toes, pain forgotten in sudden excitement. "Ma, does that mean we're staying for breakfast and supper, too?" Elena's breath caught like a sob held back. Her carefully packed bundle tumbled to the floor, clothes scattering like autumn leaves. Caleb sliced the precious cornbread into 5 equal pieces instead of hoarding it whole. Each slice thin as paper, but shared fair. He heated lard in his cast-iron skillet until it sizzled, then laid the bread pieces into brown. The smell of cooking food filled the cabin like answered prayer, rich and warm and promising. Mary crept closer, corn husk doll clutched tight. "Is this really going to be our house now, Mr.?" Elena's hand covered her mouth, but tears leaked between her fingers anyway. Samuel reached tiny fists toward the sound of breakfast cooking, his weak cry changing to something more demanding, like maybe he remembered what being fed regular felt like. Caleb set 5 wooden spoons on the table, mismatched pieces he'd whittled during long winter evenings when silence pressed heavy as snow. Never thought he'd need more than one. "Reckon it is," he told Mary. Elena stood frozen among the scattered clothes, her gray eyes holding the look of someone afraid to believe good news might be real. The cornbread turned golden in the skillet. Crackling with promise, outside, hoofbeats approached steady across the hard pan. Multiple riders this time, moving with purpose through the morning mist. Caleb's jaw tightened as he counted the sounds. 3 horses, maybe 4. Coming direct toward his cabin like they knew exactly what they'd find here. Elena stepped instinctive toward her children, her body forming a shield. "More visitors," she whispered. "Folks seem mighty interested in your business all of a sudden." Thomas pressed against his mother's worn skirts. "Ma, is somebody coming to take us away?" The hoofbeats grew louder, deliberate, official. And Elena's face went gray as winter sky, like she recognized the sound of authority come calling. 3 men on horseback pulled up beside Caleb's gate, dust settling around their horses' legs like powder. The lead rider, barrel-chested with silver whiskers, touched his hat brim respectful. "Morning, right? We're tracking horse thieves through these parts. Spotted fresh tracks leading toward your spread." Caleb's shoulders loosened like rope going slack. "Haven't seen nobody but Doc Morrison yesterday. Tracks you're following are probably his mare's." The man's eyes drifted past Caleb toward the cabin windows where Elena's shadow moved behind oiled paper. Inside, baby Samuel's thin cry rose and fell like a handsaw working green wood. Sounds like you got company in there. Family visiting from back east. Caleb's voice carried no invitation for further questions. You boys need water for your horses before you move on. Much obliged. The leader swung down from his saddle. Name's Patterson. These here are my boys, Jake and Will. While the horses drank deep from Caleb's wooden trough, the men stretched saddle-stiff muscles and made polite conversation about weather and cattle prices. Patterson's gaze kept wandering toward the cabin where children's voices could be heard mixing with Elena's softer tones. Family sounds lively, Patterson observed. Been a spell since these parts heard young ones laughing. Yes, sir, it has. Caleb kept his answers short and neutral. After the riders disappeared toward the eastern ridge, leaving only hoofprints in morning dirt and the lingering smell of horse sweat, Caleb latched his gate and returned to the cabin. Elena stood by the stove like she'd frozen mid-motion, wooden spoon halfway to her mouth. The cornbread still sizzled in the cast-iron skillet, filling the room with the rich smell of browning grain and hot lard. Just neighbors, Caleb said, settling back to his breakfast. Tracking horse thieves is all. Elena's grip on the spoon loosened gradual. She fed baby Samuel tiny pieces of bread soaked in goat milk, the child gumming each morsel with fierce determination. Color was already returning to his pale cheeks after just one real meal. Thomas crawled out from his hiding spot beneath the pine table. Mister, were those the bad men Ma's been worried about? Thomas, mind your manners. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. And his name is Mr. Wright. Actually, Caleb said, careful. Just Caleb works fine. Thomas grinned wide, showing the gap where his front tooth had fallen out recent. Can I help with chores today? Caleb, I'm real good at carrying things. Mary appeared from behind the curtain that separated sleeping areas, her corn-husk doll tucked under one arm. I can help too. Mama taught me to gather eggs proper. Don't have chickens yet, Caleb admitted. But the milk cow needs tending, and there's fence posts need setting. The children's excitement filled corners of the cabin that had stayed silent too long. Elena listened to their chatter while cleaning Samuel with a wet cloth, her movements gentle and practiced. The baby laughed at the cool water against his skin, a sound like silver bells that made everyone else smile without thinking. After breakfast, they discovered the awkward dance of sharing small spaces. Elena reached for the coffee pot at the same moment Caleb stood to clear dishes. They bumped elbows and backed away quick, both murmuring apologies. Elena reorganized his kitchen shelves without asking, then caught herself mid-reach and dropped her hands to her sides. Sorry. Old habits. I'll leave your things be. No need to apologize. Haven't had proper organization in 2 years. Caleb watched her efficient movements. You got a good eye for kitchen arrangement. By mid-morning, they'd settled into tentative rhythms. Thomas shadowed Caleb to the barn, peppering him with questions about every tool and animal on the place. Mary helped Elena with washing, hanging Thomas's torn shirt and Samuel's few baby clothes on rope strung between cottonwood trees. The gray cat appeared from whatever wild place it had been hiding, drawn by the smell of milk and the sound of children. Thomas named it Dusty on account of its color, and within an hour the animal followed him everywhere like a devoted dog. When Caleb mentioned needing supplies from town, Elena's face went cautious. I could stay here with the children. Probably better if folks don't see us all together just yet. Nonsense. Caleb was already hitching the wagon. You need things for the baby, and Thomas needs proper shoes before his feet get infected. Henderson's Mercantile squatted like a toad beside the dusty main street, its false front painted cheerful yellow despite the weathered wood beneath. Elena smoothed her hair under her worn bonnet as Caleb helped her down from the wagon seat. The store's bell jangled their arrival. 3 women clustered near bolts of fabric turned as one to stare. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her account ledger, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Morning, right?" Henderson nodded from behind his wooden counter, gaze sliding over Elena and the children like he was taking inventory. "What can I do for you today?" "Need flour, salt, sugar if you got it." Caleb's tone carried no explanation for his companions. "And shoes for the boy." Thomas pressed close to Elena's skirts. Overwhelmed by all the strange goods and unfamiliar faces, Mary carried Samuel with the competence of someone who'd been helping with babies longer than she should need to. Mrs. Patterson, the horse hunter's wife from church, whispered loud enough for half the store to hear, "Shameful arrangement, if you ask me. That poor woman and those precious children." Elena's spine straightened like an iron rod. She lifted her chin and met Mrs. Patterson's stare direct, refusing to drop her gaze until the other woman looked away first. "Anything else?" Henderson asked, counting Caleb's coins with obvious relief that payment was offered. Thomas tugged Caleb's sleeve with small, dirt-stained fingers. "What's them pretty things in the glass jar? Peppermint sticks." Caleb's weathered face softened as he looked down at the boy. "Penny candy. You ever try peppermint?" Thomas shook his head, eyes wide with wonder. Caleb bought 3 pieces despite the cost, enough to feed a grown man for half a day. But watching Mary's amazed smile and Thomas's gap-toothed grin made the expense seem like the best money he'd ever spent. Even baby Samuel gummed his piece with obvious pleasure. The women by the fabric counter whispered harder. Elena caught fragments. Improper. Living in sin. Those poor babies need Christian guidance. She gathered her children closer. Not from shame, but from protection. They'd endured enough judgment. They didn't need more from strangers who knew nothing about hunger or desperation. The wagon ride home passed in comfortable quiet. Thomas fell asleep against Elena's shoulder, sticky with peppermint and contentment. Mary hummed soft lullabies to Samuel, while the baby dozed in her careful arms. That evening, Elena mended Caleb's torn work shirt by lamplight while he whittled a wooden horse for Thomas. The needle flashed silver in the coal oil glow, her stitches small, and even as her grandmother had taught her, across the table. Pine shavings curled away from Caleb's knife like tiny yellow ribbons. Neither spoke. Words weren't needed when hands were busy with useful work. The lamplight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced and merged on cabin walls like they belonged together. Samuel slept peaceful in his makeshift cradle, a wooden box lined with Elena's spare petticoat. Thomas and Mary shared the narrow bed, their breathing deep and untroubled as children who felt safe. Elena bit off her thread and held up the mended shirt. The tear had vanished beneath her careful needlework, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Good as new." She folded the shirt with precise movements. "Better than new, maybe." Caleb looked up from his carving. The wooden horse was taking shape, 4 legs, flowing mane, eyes that seemed almost alive in the shifting light. Their gazes met across the pine table. Something passing between them that felt like understanding. "Thank you." His voice came rougher than usual. "For the mending, for helping with the children, for..." He gestured vague at the sleeping forms. "All of it." Elena's throat tightened. "Thank you for letting us stay. For making us feel..." She couldn't finish the word. Home. It felt too large and fragile to speak aloud. Outside, wind rattled the shutters against their hinges, but inside, lamplight held back the darkness. Samuel breathed easy in his sleep. The children dreamed safe dreams on clean bedding. Elena smoothed the mended shirt one more time, feeling the strength of her stitches beneath calloused fingertips. A soft scratch came against the cabin door. Not wind. Something deliberate, like fingernails testing the wood. Then silence so complete, it felt unnatural. Caleb's knife stilled on the wooden horse. Their eyes met across the table, both listening hard to the empty quiet outside. The scratching came again. Lower this time, more insistent. And baby Samuel chose that moment to wake with a thin cry that cut through the silence like a blade. Caleb rose slow from his chair, the carved wooden horse dropping from his fingers to hit pine planks with a soft thud. Elena's breath caught as he moved toward the door, her hand instinctive reaching for baby Samuel, who fussed in his makeshift cradle. The scratching came again. Softer now. More pitiful than threatening. Caleb lifted the wooden latch with one finger. The door swung open to reveal nothing but darkness and evening wind. Then a gray shape darted between his boots, a half-grown cat with one torn ear and ribs showing through matted fur. Well, Caleb's shoulders dropped like rope going slack. Reckon we got ourselves another mouth to feed. Elena's laugh escaped before she could stop it. The sound surprised them both, light and musical after so much worry. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but her eyes still crinkled at the corners. The cat wound around Caleb's legs, purring like a rusty gate hinge. Thomas stirred on the bed, mumbling sleepy words about horses and peppermint sticks. Poor thing's probably been living rough since the Henderson place burned out last spring. Caleb scratched behind the animal's good ear. Smelled our cooking. Most likely. Elena found bread scraps from supper, set them on a chipped tin plate by the door. The cat attacked the food with desperate hunger that reminded her too well of her own children's recent condition. Its pink tongue rasped against metal like sandpaper on wood. Needs milk, Elena observed, watching the animal lick the plate clean. Been hungry a good long while. They stood together in the doorway, watching their unexpected visitor eat. Night sounds settled around the cabin, owls calling from cottonwoods, cattle shifting in distant pastures, wind singing through prairie grass, ordinary sounds that felt like blessings after months of uncertainty. Getting nippy out here? Elena wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Winter's coming early this year. They closed the door against autumn's chill and returned to their evening tasks. Elena banked the fire, while Caleb checked the windows. Small rituals that felt like family routine, despite how new they were to this arrangement. Dawn brought frost that turned the grass silver as old coins. Elena woke to find the cat curled against the door, waiting patient as a church deacon. She let the animal inside, while coffee heated on the cast iron stove. Thomas appeared in his nightshirt, hair sticking up like prairie grass after a storm. Ma, where'd that cat come from? Showed up hungry. Elena poured warm milk into a shallow bowl. Just like somebody else I know. Thomas giggled, a sound that filled empty corners of the cabin with pure joy. The cat lapped milk with grateful purrs while the boy watched, fascinated by its rough tongue and twitching whiskers. Caleb emerged from the back room, suspenders hanging loose over his union suit. He stopped when he saw the cat drinking from Elena's good china bowl. the only piece of her mother's wedding set to survive the debt collectors. Sorry. Elena's hand fluttered toward the bowl. I didn't think to ask about using the good dish. Cat's got to drink from something. Caleb pulled on his work shirt, buttons catching morning light. Animal needs feeding, same as anybody else. After breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with precious molasses, Thomas followed Caleb to the barn like a devoted shadow. Elena watched through the window, the tall man shortening his stride to match small legs. Thomas chattering questions that Caleb answered with patient nods. She found herself humming while washing dishes. The tune came from somewhere deep, a song her mother used to sing while kneading bread. Elena's voice cracked from disuse, but the melody felt right floating on morning air scented with coffee and wood smoke. Mary woke with Samuel fussing in her careful arms. Mama, he needs changing again. Elena changed the baby using strips torn from her spare chemise, soft cotton that had once been white but now showed the gray of many washings. Samuel kicked strong legs, no longer the limp bundle she'd carried 20 miles through dust and desperation. Getting fat, aren't you, little man? She tickled his round belly. Samuel grinned, showing pink gums and a dimple that matched his father's. Too fat to carry all day without getting tired. Through the window came Thomas's excited voice. I'm doing it myself, Ma. Look here, I'm milking old Bessie myself. Elena moved to watch her son perched on the three-legged stool. Small hands wrapped around the cow's teats, while Caleb's larger ones covered them gentle. White streams hit the wooden pail in steady rhythm, the sound musical as rain on a tin roof. She waved from the window. Thomas beamed back, missing the teat completely in his enthusiasm. Milk sprayed across his shirt front and into the straw. Caleb's low chuckle rumbled through the morning air. The sound stopped Elena cold, deep and warm and genuinely amused. She hadn't heard Caleb laugh before, hadn't known he could make that rich noise that seemed to come from his chest, like distant thunder. After the milking lesson, Elena discovered seed potatoes in the root cellar, wrinkled things with pale eyes sprouting like tiny fingers reaching toward light. She selected the best ones, cutting them careful with her sharp kitchen knife. The garden patch behind the cabin looked like a losing battle with nature. Hard clay soil baked by summer sun, choked with weeds that had grown tough and stubborn. Elena knelt in the dirt anyway, digging holes with a wooden spoon when the ground proved too hard for her hands alone. Her fingernails filled with clay that stained them brown as coffee grounds. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. Each hole had to be exactly right, deep enough to protect the seed, shallow enough for spring shoots to reach sunlight. Thomas appeared beside her, the gray cat trailing at his heels. What you planting, Ma? Potatoes for next spring's table. Elena placed a cut piece in the hole. Eye side up like her mother had taught her. For when we're still here, come growing season. The words slipped out before she thought. Next spring, still here, like she actually believed this arrangement might last beyond winter's end. Will we really be here that long? Thomas asked with 6-year-old directness. Elena's hands stilled on the packed earth. She'd been thinking in terms of days, maybe weeks, not seasons stretching toward futures she didn't dare imagine. I reckon we will, she said, careful. If Caleb don't mind the company. Thomas nodded, serious, then brightened. I like it here. Caleb teaches me useful things, and Dusty likes me. He scratched the cat's chin with gentle fingers. That's what I named him, Dusty, on account of his color. Inside the cabin, Mary's voice rose in simple melody, teaching Samuel to clap his hands to the rhythm. Baby laughter mixed with her clear notes like bells chiming harmony. Pat a cake, baker's man, bake me a cake as fast as you can. Samuel's claps came random and enthusiastic, more flailing than rhythm. But Mary encouraged each attempt with the patience of someone who understood that learning took time. Elena smiled at the sound. Mary had inherited her grandmother's gift for music, the ability to make even ordinary moments feel special with the right song. Her mother used to say music could heal most anything that ailed a person. By dinner time, Elena had planted 2 neat rows of potatoes. Her back ached from bending, and clay stained her skirt beyond saving. But the orderly lines represented something more valuable than vegetables. They were proof of belief in tomorrow. Caleb worked near the barn, mending harness with leather needles and waxed thread. His movements held the careful precision of someone who'd learned to make things last. Thomas sat cross-legged in the dirt beside him, watching every stitch with fascination. "How come you weave it that particular way?" Thomas asked. "Leather's got memory." Caleb demonstrated the pattern. "Work with it instead of fighting it. It'll serve you twice as long." Elena listened to his gentle teaching voice while pumping water at the well. The iron handle squeaked with each stroke, but cold water felt good against her work-roughened hands. She'd forgotten how satisfying honest labor could be when you weren't just surviving day to day. That evening, they shared their first real family supper. Elena had managed to stretch their supplies into something resembling a feast: cornbread with butter churned fresh, green beans preserved from someone's garden, and milk still warm from the cow. Simple food made precious by shared appreciation. Thomas chattered about his day, describing every detail of the milking lesson with 6-year-old enthusiasm. Mary helped feed Samuel while telling stories about the songs she'd been teaching him. Even baby Samuel seemed to sense the contentment, gurgling happy sounds between spoonfuls. "This is the best supper ever," Thomas announced around a mouthful of cornbread. "Even better than Christmas dinner at Grandma's house." Elena's throat tightened. She'd worried that her children would forget their father, forget the life they'd lost. But maybe building new memories didn't mean abandoning old ones. "Your pa would be glad to see you eating so well," Elena said soft. "He always said a good meal was worth more than gold." Thomas nodded serious, then returned to his food with renewed appetite. After supper, while Elena washed dishes and Caleb carved toys by lamplight, Mary sang lullabies that drifted through the cabin like incense. Her voice carried the sweet clarity of childhood, turning simple melodies into something approaching magic. Samuel fell asleep to the sound, his tiny fists relaxed and peaceful. Thomas dozed against Caleb's shoulder while the man worked, small body trusting in the safety of strong arms. "He's taken quite a shine to you," Elena observed, watching Thomas sleep. "Good boy." Caleb's voice carried genuine affection. "Asks smart questions, listens when you tell him something important." They worked in comfortable silence while night settled around their home. 5 souls under one roof, learning the rhythm of shared living. Elena mended by lamplight while Caleb carved. Simple tasks that felt like devotion when performed together. Near midnight, Thomas stirred awake. Elena moved to carry him to bed, but Caleb was already there, lifting the boy gentle as spun glass. "Come on, partner," Caleb murmured. "Time for proper sleep." As he carried Thomas toward the bed, the boy's sleepy voice drifted through the quiet cabin. Good night, Papa. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Caleb froze mid-step. Thomas seemed unaware of what he'd said, already drifting back toward dreams. Elena's needle stilled on her mending. Her heart hammered against her ribs so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Papa, the word her children had never thought to use for any man but their father. Caleb stood motionless, Thomas drowsing in his arms. When he finally moved to tuck the boy into bed, his hands shook slightly. Thomas curled up beside Mary without waking, one small hand reaching for his sister's comfort. Caleb returned to the table, but he didn't pick up his carving. He stared at the wooden horse like he'd forgotten what it was for. He didn't mean anything by it, Elena whispered. Sometimes when children feel safe, they say things without thinking. I know. Caleb's voice came out rougher than usual. It's just been a long time since anybody called me that. Elena looked at this man who'd taken in strangers and treated them like family, who taught her son useful skills with patient hands, who carved toys in lamplight and shared his last cornbread without complaint. You been called Papa before? She asked, gentle. Caleb nodded slow. Had a boy once, long time ago, lost him and his ma to fever when he wasn't much bigger than Thomas. Elena's heart clenched. Another loss, another grief carried silent through years of solitude. No wonder kindness came hard for him. He'd learned that loving someone meant risking everything. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. Not your fault. Caleb picked up his knife, but didn't resume carving. Sometimes I wonder if that's why the good Lord brought you folks here. Give me another chance at being the kind of man my boy would have been proud of. Outside, hoofbeats approached across the hard pan, multiple riders moving fast through the darkness toward their cabin. Elena's body tensed automatic. More visitors meant trouble in her experience. But these horses carried different sounds. Familiar voices calling through the night. Mrs. Henderson's voice rose above the others. Elena, Elena, are you in there? Caleb moved to the window, peering through oiled paper at the yard filling with neighbors. Half the town's out there, he said, surprised. And they brought supplies. Elena opened the door to find her former critics transformed into allies. Women carried soup pots and clean linens. Men brought firewood and fresh water. Children peered around their parents with curious eyes. Heard you might need help, Mrs. Henderson said, setting a covered pot on Elena's table. Brought chicken broth and willow bark tea, best remedies for breaking fevers. What fever? Elena asked, confused. Mrs. Patterson appeared with an armload of kindling for the little one. Of course. Doc Morrison sent word the baby took sick again. Elena's stomach dropped. She turned toward Samuel's cradle, sudden fear making her legs weak. The cradle sat empty. Baby Samuel was gone. Elena's heart stopped as she stared at the empty wooden box lined with her spare petticoat. Samuel's blanket lay crumpled where his tiny body should have been sleeping peaceful. Mary. Elena spun toward the bed where her daughter should be sleeping. Mary, where's your brother? Right here. Ma. Mary's sleepy voice came from the corner by the stove. She sat cross-legged on a folded quilt. Baby Samuel nestled against her chest. He was fussing, so I took him to rock by the fire. Didn't want him waking Thomas. Elena's knees nearly buckled with relief. She pressed her hand to her racing heart, while nervous laughter bubbled up her throat. Merciful heavens, child. You scared 10 years off my life. Mrs. Henderson looked confused, her soup pot still steaming in the night air. But Doc Morrison said the baby was burning with fever. Said you'd sent word for help." Elena moved to Mary's side, pressing her palm against Samuel's forehead. Cool as morning air. His breathing came deep and peaceful. Tiny fists curled against his sister's dress. "Samuel's fine," Elena said, bewildered. "Been healthy as a horse since we got here. Who told Doc Morrison he was sick?" The neighbors exchanged glances. Mrs. Patterson shifted her bundle of firewood, looking uncomfortable. "Well now, that's peculiar. Doc was certain sure he'd gotten word from this place." Before anyone could puzzle out the confusion, more hoofbeats approached. This time the riders moved with official purpose. 3 women on side saddles, their dark riding habits crisp despite the dusty trail. Mrs. Crawford, Mrs. Henderson, and Mrs. Patterson dismounted with the ceremonial gravity of church committee business. Elena's stomach clenched as she recognized the look in their eyes, righteous determination mixed with Christian duty. "Mrs. Wright," Mrs. Patterson began, then stopped herself. "Oh, but you're not Mrs. Wright. Are you still Mrs. Moore? I believe—" Elena's spine stiffened. "Elena Moore." "Yes, ma'am." "Mrs. Moore." Mrs. Patterson smiled with cold politeness. "We've come to discuss your living arrangements with Mr. Wright." The neighbors who'd brought supplies began backing away like they smelled approaching storm. Mrs. Henderson gathered her soup pot. Mrs. Crawford collected her linens. Within minutes. Elena found herself alone with Caleb and the church ladies, their children listening from the shadows. "Please come inside," Elena said, though hospitality felt forced. "Coffee's still warm on the stove." They entered with the deliberate movements of women performing unpleasant duty. Mrs. Patterson settled into Caleb's good chair without invitation, her gaze sweeping the cabin's interior with obvious disapproval. "Such intimate quarters," Mrs. Patterson observed. "A single room where everything happens." Elena remained standing. Samuel warm against her shoulder, Thomas and Mary pressed close to her sides, sensing danger in the way children always could. "Our arrangements suit our needs," Elena said, careful. Mrs. Crawford pulled a leather-bound Bible from her satchel. "Deuteronomy teaches us that even the appearance of evil must be avoided. An unmarried woman dwelling alone with a bachelor man." She let the implications hang heavy. Thomas tugged Elena's skirt. "Ma, what's appearance of evil mean?" The innocent question highlighted exactly what these women had come to discuss. Elena's arm tightened protective around her son. "It means some folks see wrongdoing where none exists," Elena said. Mrs. Henderson's Bible cracked as she opened it to a marked page. "Children require proper moral guidance, Christian examples in their daily lives." Mary stepped forward, her young chin lifted with inherited stubborn pride. "Mr. Caleb ain't evil. He feeds us when we were starving. He teaches Thomas useful things. He carved me this." She held up a wooden doll Caleb had whittled during their evening hours. "Children should be seen and not heard during adult conversation." Mrs. Patterson said sharp. Elena's temper flared. "My children speak when they have something worth saying." Mrs. Crawford produced a pamphlet from her bag. Bold letters proclaimed, "Territorial Children's Home, Christian Care for Unfortunate Youth." The pamphlet hit the pine table like a physical threat. Elena's vision grayed at the edges. "The territorial authorities provide excellent care for children in difficult circumstances," Mrs. Crawford said, gentle. "Clean beds, regular meals, proper Christian education, far better than this irregular situation." Elena's world tilted sideways. They meant to take her children. These women with their Bibles and righteous certainty were discussing separating her family like it was a business transaction. "Over my dead body." The words tore from Elena's throat before wisdom could stop them. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Such language in front of innocent children. You prove our concerns valid, dear." Through the window, Elena spotted Caleb feeding hay to the horses. His movements held the tension of someone listening to every word while pretending not to hear. She could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the pitchfork tight. "These children stay with me," Elena said, voice shaking with rage and fear. "We've done nothing wrong." "Perhaps not yet," Mrs. Patterson stood, smoothing her riding skirts. "But temptation has ways of overcoming the weak. We simply hope to prevent tragedy before it occurs." After they left, in a cloud of dust and disapproval, Elena stood at the table, staring at the torn remains of their pamphlet. She'd ripped it to pieces while they watched, her hands shaking with fury. Caleb entered quiet, closing the door with more force than necessary. "Meddling old biddies. They could make real trouble." Elena's voice came small. "Church ladies carry weight with territorial officials." Thomas picked up a paper fragment, studying the partial words with worry. "What's a children's home?" "Ma." Elena knelt to his level, gathering torn pieces with unsteady fingers. "Nothing you need concern yourself with, sweetheart." But concern had already settled in the cabin like winter cold. It crept through cracks in the walls and pooled in corners where laughter used to echo. The next morning brought practical problems that made their situation worse. Caleb spread their remaining coins on the table. 17 silver pieces that represented their total wealth. "Been adding figures all night," he said, fatigue lining his weathered face. 4 extra mouths stretch supplies thinner than I calculated. We'll be out of flour by month's end." Elena stared at the pitiful collection of money. 17 coins between 5 people, and winter coming fast. The arithmetic was simple and devastating. "I could take in washing," she offered, desperate, "or sewing, something to bring in money. Who's washing?" Caleb's question held no meanness, just hard reality. "Nearest neighbor's 8 miles off. And half the women in town think you're a fallen woman already." The words hit like physical blows. Elena absorbed them without flinching, but they left marks all the same. "There's logging work up north," Caleb continued, reluctant. "Dangerous, but pays good money. Month or 2 of that would see us through winter." Elena's heart stopped. Logging camps meant broken bones and crushed bodies. Good money for men willing to risk everything. "How long would you be gone?" 6 weeks, maybe 8 if weather holds. 8 weeks alone with 3 children and winter coming. 8 weeks of feeding them from stores already running low. 8 weeks of defending their arrangement to anyone who cared to question it. "What if something happened to you up there?" Elena asked the question that terrified her most. Caleb's silence answered louder than words. They both knew logging casualty rates. Strong men left home and came back broken, or didn't come back at all. "Maybe," Elena's voice broke. "Maybe those church ladies were right. Maybe this arrangement ain't fair to any of us." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" Elena faced him direct. "Look what we're already dealing with. And we ain't even been here 3 weeks. Money running short, gossips circling like vultures, officials questioning our morals. What happens when winter sets in proper? We figure it out." "How?" Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You can't work dangerous jobs and protect us too. I can't earn money and care for 3 children without help. And the whole town's watching every move we make, waiting for us to prove their worst fears right." Their argument drew them closer together, voices dropping as frustration mixed with desperation. Elena could smell hay dust on Caleb's clothes, see worry lines etched around his gray eyes. "There might be another way," Caleb said, quiet. "Something that would satisfy the church ladies and make everything legal proper." "What kind of solution?" Before Caleb could answer, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. But these weren't neighbors or church committee ladies. These riders wore badges that caught morning sunlight like warnings. Marshal Garrett's authoritative voice carried through the cabin walls. "Right. We need to talk about your household situation. Got complaints from concerned citizens." Elena clutched Samuel against her chest, while Thomas and Mary pressed frightened against her legs. Through the window, she could see 3 lawmen dismounting, their faces grim with official business. "Mrs. Moore," Marshal Garrett's voice held the flat tone of territorial law. "We've received formal complaints about improper cohabitation. Time to settle this matter permanent." Elena looked at Caleb, seeing her own trapped desperation reflected in his weathered features. Whatever solution he'd been about to suggest was too late now. The law had come to make their choice for them, and from the grim set of the marshal's jaw, Elena knew their family was about to be torn apart whether she fought or submitted. The only question was whether she'd go down swinging or surrender without a battle. Samuel whimpered against her shoulder, sensing her fear through the rapid beating of her heart. Marshal Garrett stepped through the cabin door without invitation, his 2 deputies flanking him like bookends. Elena's hands shook as she clutched Samuel tighter, the baby's breath warm against her neck. "Mrs. Moore," the marshal's voice held the flat authority of territorial law. "Received formal complaints about unmarried persons cohabiting in violation of statute. Either you marry this man right now, or these children come with us to proper Christian care." Elena's knees nearly buckled. "Mary, right now, that's not. We barely know each other." "Law don't care about romantic notions." Marshal Garrett pulled folded papers from his coat. "Got authority to remove minors from immoral situations. Pastor Williams is waiting outside to perform the ceremony, or we load these children in the wagon." And through the window, Elena saw a 4th rider, Pastor Williams clutching his worn Bible like it might save them all from this nightmare. Elena's voice failed completely. How could she ask such a thing of Caleb? How could she not? With her children's futures balanced on a legal knife edge, Thomas pressed against her legs, his small face pale with confusion. "Ma, what's happening?" Before Elena could answer, Samuel's body went rigid in her arms. His breathing hitched once, twice, then came faster and shallower. Heat radiated through his thin shirt like he was burning from inside. "Oh God," Elena whispered. "He's sick. Samuel's sick." Doc Morrison chose that moment to arrive, his black bag bouncing against his saddle. "Got word the baby took fever again," he called, dismounting quick. "Brought medicine and—" He stopped short when he saw the marshals, the grim-faced pastor. The official papers spread on Elena's table like condemnation. "What's all this, then? Legal matter," Marshal Garrett said curt. "Proceed with your medical business. Doc." Doc Morrison's experienced hands found Samuel's forehead. The baby's skin burned hot enough to blister. His tiny chest rose and fell rapid as a frightened bird's. "High fever," Doc Morrison announced. "Need to cool him down fast before it cooks his brain." Elena sank to her knees beside the wash basin, still holding her burning child. "What do I do? Tell me what to do." "Cold water, lots of it. Keep him wet and cool." Doc Morrison was already opening his bag. "And pray this breaks before morning," Samuel began to convulse. Small tremors that shook his whole body like he was fighting invisible demons. Elena's tears dropped onto his fevered face as she tried to hold him steady. "Touching scene," Marshal Garrett said without warmth. "But we got legal business to conclude. Doc can tend the baby while we sort out this cohabitation issue." Elena looked up from Samuel's convulsing form, her face streaked with tears and desperation. "Can't you see my baby's dying? Can't this wait? Sick children need proper Christian homes," Marshal Garrett replied. "All the more reason to settle this quick." The words hit Elena like physical blows. They were using her child's illness as leverage. Her baby burned with fever, while lawmen discussed legal technicalities like they were trading livestock. "I'll do it." Caleb's voice cut through the cabin like an axe through wood. "I'll marry her." Elena stared at him through tears that made everything blur. This good man sacrificing his freedom to save her children. The shame of it burned worse than Samuel's fever. "Caleb, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice held finality that brooked no argument. "Nobody's taking these children anywhere." Pastor Williams entered on command, his thin face pale with distaste. "Hardly appropriate circumstances for Christian marriage, but the law requires proper ceremony." Elena wanted to scream, wanted to claw at these men's faces with her fingernails. Instead, she knelt in growing puddles of wash water, her dress soaked through, holding her convulsing baby while strangers forced marriage vows at gunpoint. "Make it quick," Elena whispered. "I can't leave him. Not while he's burning up." Pastor Williams opened his Bible with theatrical gravity. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. Skip the fancy parts," Marshal Garrett interrupted. "Just get to the legal requirements." What followed was the most degrading 5 minutes of Elena's life. She knelt on wet pine boards in a soaked dress, hair hanging loose around her shoulders, baby convulsing in her arms while a disgusted pastor mumbled marriage vows like an unwanted chore. "Do you, Caleb Wright, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Elena Moore, take this man?" Elena's voice caught in her throat. The words felt like swallowing broken glass. She was forcing this decent man into marriage to save her children, using his kindness against him, trapping him with her troubles. "I do." The words came out as broken whispers. "You may kiss the bride." Caleb knelt beside her in the spreading water. His lips brushed hers so gently she barely felt it. A ghost of a kiss that tasted like salt and sorrow and promises neither of them had chosen. "Mrs. Wright," Marshal Garrett said with satisfaction. "Legal problem solved. Children stay with their parents." After the officials left, Elena remained kneeling in the puddles, holding Samuel while his fever raged. Her wedding dress was a soaked, muddy disaster. Her hair hung in wet tangles. She looked like exactly what she felt, a desperate woman who'd traded her dignity for her children's safety. Samuel's breathing grew more labored as night fell. Doc Morrison worked over him with gentle competence, but worry lines creased his weathered face. "Fever's climbing," he admitted quiet. "Children his age. Sometimes they just can't fight temperatures this high." Elena's tears fell steady now, mixing with wash water that pooled around her knees. She'd gained a husband and might lose a son all in the same evening. Near midnight, hoofbeats approached through driving rain. Elena looked up with dull eyes, expecting more officials come to torment them. Instead, she heard familiar voices calling through the storm. "Elena, Elena, we're here to help." The door opened to reveal Mrs. Henderson, soaked to the skin and carrying a basket of supplies. Behind her came Mrs. Crawford with clean linens. Mrs. Patterson with firewood despite her earlier condemnation. "Heard the little one took bad sick," Mrs. Henderson said, water dripping from her gray hair. "Brought chicken broth and willow bark tea." Elena stared at these women who'd condemned her that very afternoon. They stood in her doorway like drowned rats, their fine clothes ruined by storm and mud, offering help to the family they'd tried to destroy hours earlier. "Why?" Elena's voice broke completely. "This morning, you wanted my children taken away." Mrs. Patterson set down her soggy bundle of kindling, her severe face gentled by concern. "Sick baby changes everything. Politics can wait till he's breathing easier." They bustled around the cabin with efficient purpose, heating broth, preparing cool cloths, organizing medicine. The same women who'd whispered about improper arrangements now worked like family to save Samuel's life. Elena watched through her tears as former enemies became allies. Mrs. Henderson spooned broth between Samuel's parched lips. Mrs. Crawford held cool cloths to his burning forehead. Mrs. Patterson kept the fire burning bright against the storm. "Don't understand," Elena whispered to Mrs. Patterson. "You called us shameful this morning." "Morning's got nothing to do with tonight," the older woman replied, her hands gentle on Samuel's fevered brow. "Judging's easy when folks aren't suffering. Different story when you see real need." Through that endless night, Elena learned something about small communities she'd never understood. The same people who judged harshly in daylight could show unexpected mercy in darkness. Gossip and righteousness meant nothing when faced with a dying child. As dawn broke gray through storm clouds, Samuel's fever finally showed signs of breaking. His breathing eased slightly. Color returned to his pale lips. Elena, exhausted and still muddy from her night vigil, looked up to find the entire community gathered in her cabin. People who'd whispered about her morals now smiled with genuine relief at her baby's improvement. "Looks like he'll pull through," Doc Morrison announced. "Keep him cool and fed, but the worst is past." Elena nodded through tears of relief and exhaustion. She'd married a man she barely knew, nearly lost her baby, and discovered that sometimes your harshest critics could become your strongest allies. But as neighbors began packing supplies to leave, Mrs. Crawford approached with news that made Elena's blood run cold. "There's been another development," she said quiet. "Riders came through town near dawn. Apache raiders hit the Patterson place, burned them out complete." Elena's stomach clenched. The Patterson family. Mrs. Crawford's face went grave. "All dead but the baby granddaughter, little thing not even walking yet. Riders found her hidden in the root cellar, screaming from hunger and fear." Elena looked at her own recovering children, then at the woman delivering this terrible news. "Where's the baby now?" Mrs. Crawford met her eyes with meaningful intensity. "Still riding with those men. No wet nurse among them. No woman to care for an infant. That little one won't last another day without proper tending." The implication hung heavy in morning air. Another orphaned child. Another life hanging by threads. And Elena, despite having barely survived this night herself, already knew what she'd have to do. But through the window, she spotted more riders approaching through the gray dawn. These moved different, urgent, desperate. One rider slumped in his saddle. Dark stains covering his shirt. Blood stains. And from somewhere among the approaching horses came a sound that made Elena's heart stop. The thin wail of a hungry baby. Barely audible over morning wind. The survivors had arrived at her door. The wounded rider tumbled from his horse 20 feet from Elena's door, hitting hard-packed earth with a sound like dropped grain sacks. Dark blood soaked through his shirt front, spreading wet stains that caught morning light. "Patterson!" Caleb ran toward the fallen man. "Doc, get out here. We got trouble." Elena clutched Samuel, still weak from his broken fever, and moved toward the pack horse that carried the crying infant, behind canvas wrappings. She found a baby girl, maybe 6 months old, her tiny fists waving desperate hunger. "My granddaughter," Patterson gasped as Doc Morrison knelt beside him. Pink foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "Sarah. Last one left. Raiders got everyone else." Elena lifted the baby from the pack with gentle hands. The child's diaper hung soaked and filthy, her skin hot with fever and dehydration. How long had she been crying in that makeshift cradle while her grandfather bled and rode for the only help he knew? "Get her inside," Caleb called. His hands pressed against Patterson's belly wound. Blood seeped between his fingers like spilled molasses. "I'll do what I can for him." Elena carried baby Sarah into the cabin where neighbors still lingered from Samuel's long night. The women took one look at the orphaned infant and moved with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Henderson heated goat milk, while Mrs. Crawford found clean cloths. Mrs. Patterson, her own husband's kin lying wounded outside, prepared a makeshift cradle without a word of complaint. "Poor little lamb," Mrs. Crawford cooed as Elena cleaned the baby's fevered skin. "Lost everything but still fighting. Takes real strength to survive what she's been through." Elena tested goat milk against her wrist, too rich for such a young stomach. She diluted it with well water, warmed it gentle over the fire. Baby Sarah managed a few drops before exhaustion overwhelmed hunger. Patterson died just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Elena closed his eyes with respectful fingers, while Doc Morrison shook his head at the waste of it all. Another good man gone, leaving nothing but grief and an orphaned child who'd never know her family's love. "What happens to her now?" Thomas asked. Studying baby Sarah with 6-year-old curiosity. Elena looked at the infant sleeping in Mary's careful arms, then at her own children who'd found safety in this unlikely home. Another mouth to feed when money was already tight, another child depending on whatever care she could provide. "She stays with us," Elena said quiet. "Family doesn't end at blood relations." What Mrs. Henderson nodded approval. "That baby needs a mother's touch. You've proven yourself capable with your own young ones." The morning brought more surprises. Neighbors who'd come to help with Samuel's fever now stayed to organize Patterson's burial and discuss what to do with his abandoned property. Good farmland going to waste since the Apache raid. "Place needs someone to work it," observed Jim Crawford, Mrs. Crawford's practical husband. "Can't let good soil sit empty through winter." Elena caught Caleb's eye across the cabin. Patterson's place adjoined their property, doubled their holdings if they could manage both spreads, but that meant more work, more responsibility, more mouths to feed from resources already stretched thin. "I could manage both places," Caleb said, careful. "With help during harvest season." "You'd have help," promised Jake Morrison, Doc's eldest son. "Good neighbors don't let crops rot when folks are depending on them." As word spread through the territory about the Apache raid and the orphaned baby, something shifted in the community's attitude. The same people who'd whispered about Elena's moral character now spoke of her Christian charity in taking another child. Former critics became supporters, praising her strength and Caleb's generosity. By afternoon, a dozen men arrived with tools and determination. They'd organized themselves to harvest Patterson's wheat before autumn weather could destroy it. Elena watched through her window as neighbors worked Caleb's and Patterson's fields with equal dedication. Mrs. Henderson appeared at Elena's elbow with fresh bread still warm from her own oven. "For the workers, can't expect men to labor on empty stomachs." Mrs. Crawford brought preserves and butter. Mrs. Patterson contributed a whole ham, smoked to perfection in her own smokehouse. The women who'd tried to separate Elena's family that morning now competed to show their support. "Funny how tragedy changes folks' thinking," Mrs. Crawford observed, watching Elena nurse both babies, Samuel recovering his strength, Sarah learning to trust new hands. "Tragedy shows us what matters most," Elena replied. "Everything else is just noise." The harvest continued 3 days. Elena cooked for 20 men while managing 4 children, her hands never idle from dawn to dusk. Mary helped with the babies while Thomas carried water to the field hands. Even Dusty the cat seemed to understand the importance, staying close to comfort whichever child needed attention. Caleb worked from sunup to dark, organizing crews and managing 2 properties with quiet efficiency. Elena watched him move among the men, giving directions, solving problems, earning respect through steady competence. He'd grown into the role of community leader like he was born for it. On the final evening, as wagons loaded with grain headed toward town elevators, the community gathered for an impromptu celebration in Elena's yard. Fiddles appeared from nowhere, along with tables groaning under contributed dishes. Children played while adults talked and laughed in the golden light of sunset. Elena moved through the celebration accepting congratulations and offers of friendship from former critics. Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd questioned her morals, now openly praised Elena's strength in caring for an orphaned baby along with her own children. "Takes a special kind of woman to open her heart that wide," Mrs. Patterson said, bouncing baby Sarah on her knee. "This little one's blessed to have found you." As neighbors packed up to head home, Pastor Williams approached Elena with surprising humility. He removed his hat, held it awkward in weathered hands. "Mrs. Wright," he began, then stopped himself. "About that wedding ceremony. Wasn't fitting for a Christian marriage. All that legal pressure and territorial interference." Elena studied his face, noting how the harsh righteousness had been replaced by something gentler, more human. "A proper wedding should be about love and commitment," Pastor Williams continued, "not law enforcement and community pressure. If you and Mr. Wright would like, I could perform a real ceremony, in church, with everyone witnessing proper, make it right and holy instead of just legal." Elena's throat tightened. A real wedding, chosen freely instead of forced by circumstances, witnessed by neighbors who'd learned to respect their family instead of condemn it. "I'd need to discuss it with Caleb," she managed. "Of course. Take your time. Whenever you're ready. If you're ready. The church doors open?" After the last neighbor departed, Elena found Caleb in the barn, checking on Patterson's horses. The animals needed care, despite their owner's death. Life continued its practical demands, even when hearts were breaking. Pastor Williams offered to perform a proper wedding ceremony, Elena said to Caleb's back as he brushed the mare's coat. "In church, with the whole community there to witness." Caleb's hands stilled on the horse's neck. What do you think about that? Elena considered the question that would shape their future. Last night's forced vows had been about survival and legal protection. A church wedding would be about choice and commitment, about claiming their partnership openly instead of having it thrust upon them. I think we've earned the right to choose our own vows this time, she said, quiet. Caleb turned to face her, lamplight making his weathered features look younger. Then we'll do it proper. Get married because we want to, not because we have to. They stood in comfortable silence, surrounded by the sounds of settling animals and evening birds. 4 children slept safe in their cabin, Thomas and Mary, baby Samuel growing stronger each day, and little Sarah learning to trust new voices. The Patterson place gives us room to grow, Caleb said eventual. Good land for crops, pasture for more cattle, could make something substantial of the combined properties. Something to pass on to the children, Elena agreed. Give them real futures instead of just survival. All 4 of them, Caleb clarified. Sarah's as much ours now as the others. Elena's heart swelled at his easy acceptance. This man who'd lived alone so long now planned futures for 4 children without question or complaint. They walked back to the house together, partners in truth now instead of legal necessity. The cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming after the day's labors. Home in the deepest sense, not just shelter, but belonging. Elena checked on the children before settling at the pine table with her mending. Caleb carved toys by lamplight, a wooden horse for Thomas, a doll for Mary, rattles for both babies, simple gifts made with patient love. Tomorrow, I'll start preparing Patterson's house for winter, Caleb said, his knife working smooth curls from pine wood. Could move the older children there if they want more space. Keep the babies here where you can tend them easier. Elena smiled at his careful planning, from a man who'd measured coffee beans like coins to someone organizing space for a family of 6. Maybe more someday, if they were blessed with children of their own. Thinking about the future feels strange, Elena admitted. Been so long since I could plan beyond next week. We've got time now, Caleb said. Time to build something lasting. The evening passed peaceful until rapid hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Elena looked up from her sewing to see a lone rider approaching fast through the darkness. Not neighbors. They'd all gone home, not officials. This rider moved with personal urgency. The horse slid to a stop in their yard, foam flecking its sides from hard running. A young man dismounted quick, hat pulled low over his features. Right, he called. You got to help me. They're coming. Elena's blood chilled at the desperation in his voice. Another crisis. Another person running from trouble toward their door. But as the stranger stepped into their lamplight, Elena's breath caught in recognition. The face beneath the hat belonged to Jake Patterson, the dead man's nephew, who should have been safe in Denver according to family letters. Instead, he stood bleeding in their yard with terror in his eyes and the sound of pursuit echoing across the prairie behind him. Uncle's dead. Ain't he? Jake's voice cracked. And they killed everyone else too. I'm next unless you help me. Through the darkness came the distant sound Elena had learned to fear. Multiple riders approaching fast with official purpose and legal papers that could destroy everything they'd built. Jake Patterson swayed in the lamplight, one hand pressed against a bloody gash across his ribs. They ain't Apache raiders, he gasped. Land grabbers. Been picking off homesteaders for months, making it look like Indian raids. Elena's stomach dropped. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Not lawmen this time, but killers who'd murdered Jake's family and burned their home to claim the property. How many? Caleb was already reaching for his rifle above the door. 4, maybe 5. Jake's legs buckled. Elena caught his arm, feeling blood seep through torn fabric. They'll be here soon. Tracked me from the river crossing. Caleb checked his rifle chamber, then looked at Elena holding baby Sarah, while Samuel slept peaceful in his cradle. Thomas and Mary peered wide-eyed from their bed, sensing adult fear without understanding its source. "Root cellar," Caleb said quick. "Take the children down there and stay quiet no matter what you hear." "What about Jake?" Elena asked, supporting the wounded young man's weight. "He comes with us." Caleb's jaw set hard. "Nobody else dies tonight." They'd barely gotten the children hidden when riders thundered into the yard. Elena crouched in the musty darkness beneath their house, holding both babies while Thomas and Mary pressed against her sides. Jake slumped unconscious against the earthen wall, his breathing shallow but steady. Above them, boot heels struck wooden floors. Rough voices demanded information about Patterson survivors. Furniture crashed as strangers searched their home for evidence of Jake's presence. "Nobody here but you." "Right," a gravelly voice declared. "Where's the boy?" "Don't know what boy you're talking about." Caleb replied, calm. "Patterson's nephew. Tracked him this direction." "You hiding him?" "Search if you want. Ain't nobody here but me and my family." Elena held her breath as heavy footsteps moved overhead. Samuel stirred in her arms but didn't cry, as if even babies understood the need for silence. Mary's hand found Thomas's, their fingers interlocking tight. "Family, you say?" Another voice, younger and meaner. "Heard you got yourself married recent, to that widow with all them kids." "Legal and proper," Caleb said, steady. "Pastor Williams performed the ceremony himself." "Convenient. Woman shows up desperate. You get yourself a wife and instant family. Some men have all the luck." Elena's cheeks burned with shame, even hidden in darkness. They were discussing her like property, her marriage like a business transaction. But Caleb's voice never wavered, never gave ground to their crude implications. The searchers spent another hour tearing through the cabin and barn before admitting defeat. Their horses' hoofbeats finally faded toward the eastern ridge, carrying murder and greed back to whatever hole had spawned them. "They'll be back," Jake whispered when they emerged from hiding. "Soon as they figure I got away clean." "No, they won't." Caleb's voice held quiet certainty. "Because you're going to disappear proper. New name, new territory, new life where nobody knows Patterson had a nephew." They spent the rest of the night planning Jake's escape. Dr. Morrison arrived before dawn with medical supplies and a fresh horse. Mrs. Henderson brought traveling clothes and enough food for a week's journey. Mrs. Crawford contributed silver coins collected from neighbors who'd heard about the threat. "Denver's got opportunities for young men willing to work," Doc Morrison told Jake as he cleaned and bandaged the wounded ribs. "Carpenter's trade pays good money if you got steady hands." By sunrise, Jake Patterson had become James Parker, traveling carpenter seeking work in Colorado's growing cities. He rode out with a new identity, honest work prospects, and enough community support to start fresh far from anyone who might connect him to his murdered family. Elena watched him disappear into morning mist. Another life saved by neighbors who'd learned to choose mercy over judgment. The same people who'd condemned her arrangement now conspired to protect a fugitive from killers. "Community's got long memory for some things," Mrs. Henderson observed, watching Jake's dust settle. "But short memory for others when folks prove themselves worthy." 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the community church wearing her best dress, Not the ruined calico from that desperate wedding night, but new fabric purchased with harvest money and sewn by willing neighbors. Mrs. Crawford had contributed lace trim. Mrs. Henderson had provided pearl buttons, and Mrs. Patterson had insisted on silk ribbon for Elena's hair. The same church that had witnessed their forced union now hosted a celebration of chosen love. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, blessing the wooden pews filled with neighbors who'd learned to see strength instead of scandal in their family story. Thomas and Mary stood proud beside the altar, dressed in their finest clothes and beaming with importance. Baby Samuel gurgled contentment in Mary's careful arms, while little Sarah slept peaceful against Thomas's shoulder. 4 children who'd found safety and belonging in the most unlikely circumstances. Pastor Williams spoke with genuine warmth instead of grudging duty. We gather today to witness love that grew from shared hardship, family that formed through choice rather than blood, community that strengthened when tested by adversity. His words carried none of the harsh righteousness from that terrible night. Instead, they held grace and acceptance, recognizing what Elena and Caleb had built together through determination and faith. Do you, Caleb Wright, choose to take Elena as your wife, to love and protect her and these children as your own family? I choose her. Caleb's voice rang clear through the wooden church. I choose all of them. Do you, Elena Wright, choose to take Caleb as your husband, to build a life and family together through whatever may come? Elena looked at this man who'd saved them from starvation, who'd married her under duress but stayed from love, who'd helped her fight for Samuel's life and welcomed Sarah without question. Her throat tightened with gratitude too large for words. I choose him, she said, voice carrying to every corner of the church. I choose this family. The congregation erupted in genuine celebration, applause and laughter and calls of blessing. Mrs. Henderson dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. Mrs. Crawford beamed like a proud grandmother. Even stern Mrs. Patterson smiled with obvious approval. After the ceremony, the entire community gathered for a feast that turned the churchyard into a fairground. Tables groaned under contributed dishes, ham and chicken, fresh bread and preserves, pies and cakes that spoke of abundance rather than mere survival. Elena moved through the celebration, accepting congratulations and promises of continued friendship. But her attention kept returning to her family. Caleb teaching Thomas to throw horseshoes, Mary showing baby Sarah to admiring neighbors, Samuel sleeping content in his decorated cradle. That evening, alone at last in their cabin, Elena sat at the pine table, writing a letter by lamplight. The words came slow but sure, each one chosen careful. My dearest William, she wrote to her first husband's memory, today I married again. A good man who loves our children like his own and gives us all the security you would have wanted us to have. I hope you understand that loving him doesn't diminish my love for you. It just means my heart grew large enough to hold both. She signed the letter, folded it with reverent care, then fed it to the fire. The paper curled and darkened, carrying her words up the chimney toward heaven like incense or prayer. Caleb joined her at the table with his evening carving. The wooden toys he crafted had multiplied, horses and dolls and rattles enough for all their children, with extras to trade in town for supplies. His hands worked with patient skill, creating beauty from simple pine. Thinking about expanding the house come spring, he said without looking up from his work. Children are growing fast. Need more room for everyone. Elena smiled at his practical planning. From a man who'd hoarded cornbread to someone designing space for a family that might grow even larger. The transformation still amazed her. The Patterson place will make good grazing for more cattle, she observed. Sarah should have something substantial to inherit when she grows up. All the children should, Caleb agreed. Build something lasting they can be proud of. They worked in comfortable silence while night settled around their home. 4 children slept safe under their roof. Thomas and Mary on the new bed Caleb had built. Baby Samuel and little Sarah in matching cradles he'd crafted with loving care. Dusty the cat stretched between them, all like a furry guardian. Outside. Autumn wind tested the shutters, but inside, lamplight held back the darkness. The fire crackled with warmth and security. Family sounds filled spaces that had echoed with loneliness too long. Elena touched her wedding ring, simple gold that caught the lamplight. This time the circle meant choice instead of coercion. Love earned through hardship instead of forced by law. She looked across the table at Caleb's weathered hands creating gifts for their children, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life built from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. Tomorrow would bring winter's challenges, decisions about livestock and crops, and the 1,000 practical matters of expanding family life. But tonight, they were simply home. Elena Wright, wife and mother, surrounded by the people she'd chosen to love. In a house filled with children's laughter and a good man's quiet strength. In a community that had learned to embrace rather than condemn. She'd made it home at last. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, thinking about Elena Wright and what she taught me about the true meaning of community. She showed me that families aren't just born, they're chosen, built from shared meals and patient kindness when the world turns cold. In our modern times, when neighbors barely know each other's names and folks pass by suffering without stopping. Elena's story reminds me that real strength comes from opening doors to strangers, from choosing to see desperation as opportunity rather than inconvenience. Caleb Wright proved that love often begins with practical acts: shared cornbread, mended clothes, fevered babies cooled with gentle hands. He showed me that being a man isn't about standing alone, but about carrying burdens too heavy for one person's shoulders. Their community learned that mercy matters more than moral posturing when children cry from hunger, that sometimes the folks you judge harshest can become your strongest allies when crisis tests everyone's character. What would happen if we stopped asking whether people deserve our help and started asking how we can serve those who need it most? This story is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment purposes and does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence, harmful behavior, or illegal activities. All characters, events, locations, and situations depicted are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to actual events, locations, or circumstances is purely coincidental. The narrative content is intended as wholesome family entertainment exploring themes of compassion, community support, and human resilience during historical frontier periods. Readers should understand this work as fictional storytelling rather than historical documentation or behavioral guidance.